Shalom. We're still in Parashah Phineas, looking at the events that basically set themselves up in the last Torah portion with the Moabites, with King Balak going to Balaam asking for his wisdom, and also prior to that trying to do spiritual warfare against Israel, which failed. And then Balaam revealed the mystery, the key to break the protection of Yahweh, which is, let your daughters defile the sons of Israel, and then Yahweh, and they will sin, and then Yahweh's blessing and his hand will lift. If that is not blatantly a very simple truth, and yet we ignore that. I heard that Israel is proudly hanging the gay flag next to their flag. Now, that is the tactic of Balaam. And guess what? Yahweh's hand will lift and Israel will be exposed. And this is a shift that happened in the political realm that's going to have physical negative consequences for Israel. I still love Israel. I'm still backing Israel, but the enemy has infiltrated, and we'll see the consequences of that in the next couple of weeks playing off. Anyway, going back to the starting point of this Torah portion, I analyzed the word Baal Peor this morning. Now, Baal, Bet, Ayin, Lamet, and Peor is Pei, Ayin, Vav, Resh. I also looked at good and evil yesterday. Evil is Ra, which is Resh, Ayin. Now, what you'll note in Ra or evil, you find the Ayin, and in Baal Peor there are two Ayins, and we looked at the two Ayins, or the two eyes, last week, specifically the eye of Horus, the Egyptian eye. Then we saw the eye of the capstone, the all-seeing eye on the pyramid, which is basically the foundation of the system that is ruling Babylon, that infiltrated political and religious and leadership areas of governance and leadership. Now, unfortunately, that is what man-made wisdom is all about nowadays. It's the spirit of Darda we found last week, which is their Solomon. The enemy's Solomon is Darda, and he's the wise man of Egypt, who is working amongst the people in the world, specifically leaders in the world, and they set everything up according to his wisdom. Now, we know that the spirit of Yahweh was the key behind Solomon's wisdom, and Yahweh's wisdom is based on the scroll, Sefer. And we saw that in King Josiah. He found the hidden scroll, which is the Torah, and then he got rid of all the idols and burned them and set everything back into place. And then he had the first Pesach and reinstated the Moedim, and then the covering of Yahweh came back to Israel. So we've got the recipe on how to fix it, and now we've got the recipe of the enemy on how to undo Yahweh's protection, and now the enemy can get a foot in the door, so to speak, to destroy Yahweh's people. Now, I just want to stop here now, because this word doesn't mean anything unless you can apply it to your own life. So do introspection. Think about things that you might be involved in, that you might do, that you might allow in your life. That is the eye of Darda, the eye that comes from the physical, that want you to sin. Now, the word Ra is found in Genesis in relation to the tree of life, where she saw the fruit was good and for evil. That's Ra, the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and it's connected to the Ayin. Now, the Ayin is the fleshly eye, sight. What we see is good on the physical, but there's consequences that are evil. in the spiritual if we disobey the word of Yahweh. And those consequences are found in the Gematria that we will look at this coming Sabbath. Very interestingly, looking at Peor. Now Peor, Baal Peor, is based on the worship of an idol called Peor. Now, the idol of Peor is worshipped by women prostituting themselves, and that was how they worshipped this idol. Now, is that alive and well and working and active in today's society? Is that promoted? Is that worship promoted? The worship of Peor in our modern society? If you look at TV programs, movies, there's so many movies that are now gay and lesbian. There's so many things that are explicit, getting people involved into, opening up the doorway to lust through pornography on the internet and all sorts of things that's connected to the eye. Not only males, but it's targeting males, but not only males, females as well, because this spirit is behind every form of fleshly lust. And that is what is fueling entertainment world, through whether it's lyrics of a song, whether it's a music video, and whether it's a movie or TV series. There's always something in there that they want the eye to connect, and then it opens up the mind, which is Resh. So the Resh Ayin Ra is the eye that connects to the mind. Mind is where the thought processes happen, specifically the frontal lobe, where you make a decision, where you need to test what is coming through my eye gate. Is it in line with Yahweh's word? Is it in line with His commandments? Or is it against His commandments? And then we should cast down those thoughts, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, and make them subject to the word of Yahweh, which is the foundation of Torah, which Paul referred to as Mashiach. We need to make them obedient unto Mashiach. And we know that Mashiach, Yeshua, is the living Torah. So everything pertaining to holiness, everything pertaining to sin, is basically in the tree of the Torah, which is our assimilation of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And our Torah that we have, we can now see that the fruit that we ate from, which ones are good and which ones are evil. So only having the tree of knowledge of the Torah in your midst, you'll be able to avoid the fruit that look good in the physical, but leads to evil consequences and judgment of Yahweh. Peor, through the Gematria, is it's not 365, it's 356, which is, one of the words is Sepharim, which is a town in Assyria where they sacrifice babies through burning them in fire. So that's similar to Molech worship. Molech was a stone idol with his hands held out, and they made fire under the hands to make it hot, and then they placed the live baby in the hot stone hands, which are basically red hot, and then they burned to death. And that was Molech worship. I don't know if the Assyrians or the people from Sepharim worship Molech. I couldn't find that this morning. Anyway, they did similar things. And there's also a child sacrifice in Babylon. So within the Babylon system, the question we might ask is there baby sacrifices today? Is that alive and well in our midst in society today? And is that an accepted practice? The answer is yes. Because abortion, what do they do with the aborted fetuses and the limbs of the babies? They get sucked and pulled off. Live fetuses, they get incinerated, they get burned. And that is the Molech worship of fetuses through abortion. Now there's a spiritual connection that links to two festivals that are celebrated in the world today, and people are very actively celebrating them. If you can guess, the first one is Christmas. That's where you have the Yule, and where they do explicit explicit acts of sexual immorality. That was the ancient pagan form of worship during that feast, time of festivals. I think that 10 days, maybe 15 days, I can't remember. Anyway, and then the babies that are born are then sacrificed on the next Easter. And they take the blood of those babies and then they paint the eggs, which is a sign of fertility. And that's where the eggs and the symbolism of the egg come from. So we see the two festivals that are celebrated today parallels the two things that are happening today. The first one is immoral lifestyles that's explicitly promoted and accepted by society, that leads to unwanted pregnancies, where the young girls then abort their babies and they are incinerated and offered up through these two means, Peor worship and the Sepharim Molech worship. And those things were present in the time of Israel, at the time where Balaam couldn't speak a curse over Israel, where Balak and the Moabites couldn't overcome Israel because they were so strong. And then the weakness came, technology came. It's on your phone, it's on the internet. It's so accessible, it's so easy to get your eye entrapped into those things and pull you into the worship of Peor and the worship of Molech. And then a lot of young people are doing that as a lifestyle. They've got no moral conduct, any conscience that tell them that this is wrong. Maybe the girls, after they do that, they might feel that emotional void and guilt of what they've done when they realize that, but then they numb themselves down with drugs and alcohol and they just carry on doing what they're doing. So very unfortunate. So we need to pray for our young generation, because that is what is currently happening in the world, to attack Yahweh's people, specifically the next generation. And this is basically where this Torah portion is. It's them prior to entering the promised land where these things happen, and this is now the new generation where they will be exposed to that. So that's basically all I want to share today. Just the parallels, the connection to Baal Peor, the connection to the two eyes depicting the Babylonian system that infiltrated the political realm, the religious realm, as well as entertainment, Hollywood and the music industry. All of those things are working through the power of the eye, influencing mind, programming us to adopt these practices. And because it's now widely accepted by society in all of the world, I believe, maybe most nations embrace these things, and it's a standard. People just do it, and nobody bats an eye or quench when they see that, because it's the way we do things. And the enemy has got a right now to come in and destroy Yahweh's creation and Yahweh's people. Now, we will follow the storyline and we will look at Pinchas. Now, Pinchas is the opposite of Korach, as we discussed yesterday. So there are people like Pinchas. We are part of the kingdom of priests who are now standing against these things, and they make atonement on behalf of the people. I'm not saying we need to take a spear and go around and just go and take judgment upon yourself, or take judgment acts against these people. That's not what Yahweh wants us to do. He will take care of these things, and we need to help those people to come out of it, to be released from it, so they can be the nations who will come in as prophesied. So it's not a war against people, it's a war against the powers and principalities of the air, and we are currently entrapped by that. Now, just shadowing what we discovered in the 8th millennium, that is basically what the 8th millennium will face yet again. It's the power of the flesh, the power of the mind, the power of the eye. Adam and Eve was pure and perfect, and they were placed in the garden, and yet they fell because of the weakness of the eye. The eye is connected to seeing the physical things. Physical things, you can see nakedness. Nakedness is a sin, and the sinfulness of the flesh and the desires of the flesh, which is basically Egypt, the Mitzrayim, which is the enemy within that they need to battle and come against. In the same way, we need to stand up and come against your strongest enemy, which is your enemy within, the Egypt within you, the fleshly desires within you, whether it's through food, through immoral things that you watch, or habits, or addictions. Ask Yahweh to set you free from those things and focus on His word. And every time you get tempted, take His word and measure it against Yahweh's word. Is this in line with Yahweh's word? And ask the Spirit to give you power to overcome, and ask people to pray for you so you can endure. I wish you a wonderful day, and I hope you have a wonderful week. And we'll continue this conversation, and I'll speak to you later. Shalom.